I'm Lesley of So Good Kombucha, and today I am answering the question that every home brewer of kombucha is asked, and that is my kombucha moldy? And then we're going to talk about 5 ways to make sure that you will never have to ask that question or worry about that again. So let's get started. So first of all, the good news is it's actually very rare for kombucha culture or kombucha brew to get moldy. And the reason for that is simple. The pH of the brew and the kombucha culture itself is naturally antimicrobial. So it actually fights off bad bacteria, which is what makes kombucha so good for you. But if it is moldy for any reason, it would likely to be at the start of a brew, and if there isn't the environment for the good kombucha culture to flourish. But first thing first, I want to get this out of the way. If your kombucha brew has gone moldy, and I'm going to talk about how you're going to find out whether or not it has, the first thing that you got to remember is don't try to salvage it. You've got to throw it away. There is nothing that could be worth risking your health and that of your family. So get rid of it and we just have to start again. So how can you tell if it's gone moldy or not? Well, the SCOBY is, if you've not noticed, it's kind of a funny looking fella. They're not always the prettiest looking thing. And sometimes it has holes in it, and sometimes it's got green bits in it, and most of that is just tea. That doesn't necessarily mean it's moldy. So the best way of actually being able to tell is if you take a look at the thing that you think is mold, and you need to check and see if it's actually dry. If it's wet, if it's glossy, and I'm going to show you a little bit of an example of a healthy kombucha, it's always going to look shiny, it's always going to look wet and glossy. It should never be dry, and if it's dry, then I'm sorry, but it's probably going to be mold and you just got to start over. Sorry. The other thing is if it's furry, so it's dry, furry, I know it's gross, but that is definitely going to be mold. Otherwise, if it's green, but it's kind of wet, then chances are it's not mold, and you can just kind of leave it a few days and see. The other thing is that mold tends to grow in kind of like clusters, circular clusters, but then so does the kombucha culture as well. So that's not a telltale sign, but look out for the dryness and look out for the fur. Occasionally though, because this does happen sometimes, and unfortunately I don't have an example of this, I can't show you. Occasionally you might find that your kombucha is kind of got a matte finish, so it's not exactly dry and it's not furry, but it's got kind of like little grids and it looks kind of scaly and matte. That is not mold, but it could be calm yeast. So just you can Google it and check it out online to see if it matches that. Calm yeast is not it's not harmful, but it's not good either because it will make your kombucha taste funky and you don't want that. So some people have said you can kind of wait it out, and if the good kombucha culture does flourish, then it can kind of kill it off. But personally, I just don't think it's worth it. You can just throw it away and start over. Okay, so what are the 5 top tips, tried and tested, to make sure that you're not going to get any mold in your kombucha? Tip number 1, and it's something that I always make sure I always have, is you have at least 10, ideally 20% of your brew to be your starter, and including your SCOBY, your starter and mother SCOBY. You don't actually need a SCOBY to brew and ferment your kombucha. If you've got enough healthy starter to put in it, the SCOBY will naturally form at the top. But either way, it should at least be 20% of your total volume. And the reason for that is simple, is because it makes sure that the pH level of your brew is sour enough so that the bad bacteria or mold or anything you don't want can't grow in that environment. So the pH level, if you've got a measure, or if you've actually got some of those strips, as long as the pH is below 4, you should be good to go. And the other thing that I personally have found helpful is that as your SCOBY grows, give it a few days and make sure you kind of see it form. But once it's got a healthy foundation, even if it's thin, I personally like to shake things up a little bit. So what I would do is take a spoon, aerate a little bit, stir the pot, and just make sure that this enough of a sour starter or tea blend covering the top of the SCOBY, just to make sure that it's sour enough that the mold can't grow on top of it and it won't dry out. And top tip number 2, check that there is sufficient airflow. So some people like to put their kombucha in a dark place, like at the back of your cupboard. I personally don't think that's actually good. So I think the same reason why your kombucha needs to be able to have oxygen. So I talked earlier about kind of stirring it with a spoon that aerates it a little bit. You don't have to have too much, but it's not good to kind of keep in a really stuffy area, and that's not good for the kombucha mother, that's not good for the culture, and that gives an opportunity for mold and other bad bacteria to grow. The other thing is, it's a good idea not to put your kombucha brew next to a lot of houseplants because it can contaminate the brew. Top tip number 3 is, if it's really cold in the winter where you live, or if it's just cold in the winter where you live, try to keep your kombucha warm. So the best temperature is around 25 to 26 degrees. Again, that just creates a good environment so your SCOBY could be nice and happy, and that would make sure that there are no opportunities for anything else to get in there. Number 4, make sure that all the equipment that is involved with your brewing, so like your kitchen equipment and your hands, are thoroughly clean and sterilized before you start the brew, and that would help ensure kind of the unhelpful yeast that I talked about earlier, the common yeast and any of that, to not get an environment that they could get in and grow. Yeah, distilled vinegar is a really good natural way to actually sterilize. So I spray my hands with a bit of vinegar sometimes before just like picking up the SCOBY. But make sure you use distilled vinegar and not raw vinegar, because raw vinegar can actually have something that's kind of gross. It's called vinegar eel. You can Google that, it's not nice. And number 5, make sure you err on the side of caution and just scale up. If you've got a really small SCOBY and a little bit of starter, don't start brewing in like a 10-liter jar. Just start with something small, like a really little jar. Just enough to make sure that you've got at least like I said, 10 to 20% starter in there. And the other thing too is, I know you guys probably know this already, but just make sure that the liquid is cool before you put your SCOBY in, because if it's too hot, it will die. Then what you got growing in there is not kombucha. You don't want it. So there it is, happy brewing. I hope that helps. And just as a disclaimer, if you're going to be brewing kombucha at home, chances are you'll get some alcohol. So if you are pregnant or breastfeeding or alcohol intolerant, please make sure you consult with your doctor or your GP before consuming homebrew kombucha. Commercial should be okay. It'll be less than 0.5%, but just to make sure that that's all right if that's an issue that you have. Happy brewing! See you!